Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining so promptly. And there's a lot of people on today. So, good morning. Thank you. Really appreciate you joining. And I have the pleasure once again for this month being joined by, the double act has returned, Luann Wise. So thanks for joining us again, Luann.
No, thanks. It was fun last month, Andy. So, let's do it again.
Exactly. So we have a lot to cover today, and I've tried to promise that we're going to finish at least at like 10 to basically and have lots of time for questions. So we're going to dive into this without further ado. So let's just go ahead and do that. And hopefully in a second, you see the presentation, Luann?
Yeah, and I think I'll keep an eye on the questions while you're talking and vice versa in case there's anything burning that pops up as we go.
Superstar. Yeah, that would be amazing. That would be amazing. So cool. Right. Let's do it. So the changes to social that you need to know, the October edition. So Luann, do you want to give a quick intro to yourself?
Of course. Nicely aligned that we're in front of the right pictures as well. So I'm Luann Wise. I've just been talking. I live in the beautiful Cotswolds. Marketing consultant for nearly 10 years, running my own business after having worked in-house in agencies and in client-side roles as well. And I have a really nice mixture of working directly with clients, mainly in B2B, services, financial services, law, household cleaning products, universities, a whole mixture of clients that I support one-to-one, as well as getting to teach and train on behalf of LinkedIn, on behalf of Facebook and Instagram, and running sessions like this as well.
Love it. And it's so awesome to get your additional perspectives on all of these changes rather than it just being a narrative for myself. So I really appreciate you joining. And especially as you're like the designated trainer for those social media channels. Yeah, that's absolutely brilliant. You might know me already. I'm one of the founding team of Content Cal. This is what Content Cal looks like. Most of you probably know this already. This is the only promotional slide I'm going to show. But if you do want to look at how you can organize your content marketing planning, Content Cal is probably something to look at. With that, we're going to go into the stuff that you need to know from October. We're going to do three things. We're going to look at some trends that you need to be aware of. So things that we've seen emerge throughout the course of October. We're going to look at how consumption has changed. So what does that mean with usage of social media platforms? And then we're going to go into at a network by network level, or what has changed in that given month that you need to know. So let's kick off with this. And I think this is possibly one of the most exciting trends as far as I'm concerned. That's ongoing at the moment. And this has just been I talk about this every month, but I love it. This data was new. Basically, the future of e-commerce, e-commerce is growing massively. And the rate it's growing is exceeding all expectations. And I think the important thing for us to know as well, especially for the majority on this call will probably be in the UK right now, is that actually look where the UK ranks on e-commerce adoption, because there's going to be loads of data that I'm going to show you from October 2020. Usually we see UK lagging behind the rest of the world, but really, the percentage of internet users who say they bought something online via any device in the last month. So UK is very much leading the charge of that. And this whole kind of e-commerce shift is moving towards social commerce. You're going to start to see this throughout the course of what we're going to be showing you over this session. But also, we've just been seeing this trend ever since March, all of the social media channels really trying to lean on e-commerce. And really, as you'll probably be able to expect, very much those social media channels wanting to take that business away from Amazon. Any comments on the e-commerce piece, Luann?
I think this is really interesting. It'd be, and we'll never know the difference of what's been affected by the events this year versus what hasn't. But I would have expected this to happen anyway, because of the way the world's going, and people love to shop local and independents as well. And I was looking at this in particular because I know that this session is filled with stats, and sometimes we like to get into stats. And not only has there's been this big shift over recent months, but right now, this is a great stat, Christmas shoppers are starting earlier this year, and they think that 60% of us in the UK will have finished our Christmas shopping before the end of November. So I have already started, so I've got part of the way there. But also just in terms of, we'll be using e-commerce more and more, particularly as certain areas of the UK are in different levels of lockdown. Just this Christmas is coming, is going to be supported by social media. And just one other, it's not really stat related, but apparently we're all going to be putting up our decorations earlier as well, to make us feel a bit better. So I'm looking forward to, from the next few weeks, having Zoom and meeting backgrounds. I'm going to do a bit of something behind me, I think.
Love it. That is fascinating that the holiday period is starting earlier as well. It's a really important point to note. Fascinating. When this e-commerce data will go off the chart over the next couple of months, that is for sure. So
it's spreading out costs as well, isn't it? I think there's twofold of how we're living, but also people needing to spread out the cost of things a bit more now too.
Yeah, that makes a great deal of sense, actually. Very good point. For anyone on this call, which most of us will be involved in social media, this is a great stat. This is from Visa. 25% of all online purchases are influenced by social media. What a killer statistic that one is. That's the thing that's driving e-commerce. And this, statistic in its own right really amplifies the reason that social media channels are going big on this e-commerce thing. They already know that people are discovering products through social for the first time. So simply the next step for them is to help people buy those products that they discover for the first time. It's a killer statistic, that one.
Yeah.
Stepping away from the e-commerce piece for a second though. So this was some data from a business called Talkwalker, which is a good social listening tool. And they have the privilege of analyzing huge amounts of social media data. So sorry, these slides are a bit wordy. I'll kind of cut to the chase of these. But ultimately, memes have grown massively over the last 13 months. So as you can see, they've jumped up 26%. And you can see the interesting, there's a clear age demographic for memes. So it's actually the use of them and the engagement in memes have been growing, significantly. And the way that they've put that down to is users turn to them for engagement and escapism while under lockdown, which that makes perfect sense. So memes, Luann, what do you reckon?
I'm glad that the data shows that I'm too old for memes. I think, I don't know whether it's partly because I work mostly in B2B that I'm not a big meme user. I'm not a big meme consumer, but we started talking before this session. It's half term this week. I've got a 13-year-old stepson here, so I've seen quite a lot of memes this week when I'm asking about. So if they work, if they fit, I think they're great. We do need a bit of light-hearted relief as we go through social media. It's not all completely serious, but yeah, I'm kind of glad that the data shows that I'm not in the meme user category.
Love it. So there's a couple more trends that I wanted to pick up on as well. So this one's a really interesting spike of 88% increase in the mentions of keywords related to nostalgia or remembering the past. So basically, it's the way that this Talkwalker report categorized it was just nostalgia marketing. So marketing that makes people think of times in the past. And I think this is probably particularly pertinent over the course of this year, looking back to your childhood or your formative years and connecting you with something like a really fond memory from the past. And that is turning out to be a really interesting marketing trend in general to see, on a big brand level. This is kind of emphasized or amplified by the fact that Halifax had that whole campaign around Top Cat, which is probably slightly before my time. But, so you start to see that nostalgia-based marketing clearly is growing massively as a trend, which I find particularly fascinating.
I think it's always been quite important. And I think there's a different challenge right now of looking back because we're in a different mindset of kind of how things were before. But for me, when I've ever been doing kind of content training and thinking about content, nostalgia has always been one of those pillars that we've all said works because it's seen quite favorably. And one of my examples is I was working, we were talking about communicating to mums. And sometimes you can take the route of the Hurrah Gin or the Slummy Mummy or the other ones that, kind of can be a bit preachy or put you into a box of what kind of parent you are. Whereas if you do something that's nostalgia back to school days, and the example I use, because I've seen it, is that, you know, do you remember when the TV used to get wheeled into the room and you'd be able to watch something? And those kind of, it brings back the fond memories, doesn't it? And just makes you smile. So I don't think you can really go wrong with nostalgia posts, again, if it's relevant to what you're doing. But it's kind of, it's putting you back into that zone of, yes, when I was at school, or when I did this, or, you know, music from the 80s gets you moving or something. So I always think it's a great default pillar to go to if you can.
Nice. And it's just, I would agree with that. And it's just interesting to see the fact that more and more people seem to be agreeing with you, and importantly, more and more people are engaging with that type of content. So yeah, fascinating.
More of it. Yeah.
This is a very wordy slide, but this was the kind of key defining trend that Talkwalker brought out. So feel free to kind of read this as I'm talking. But ultimately, I think this is fairly self-explanatory, as well as that for brands that engaged with topics around mental health, inclusivity, social justice, are the ones that were the ones that garnered most positive sentiment over the last 6 months. So it's definitely a very difficult topic. And if I'm completely honest, us at Content Cal, we didn't engage with this, just purely not knowing the direction to take it in. But clearly there's, for people that have a defined view on this that you think is a good view to share, then there are results on the other side of that. Clearly this is the thing that got most engagement around brands over the course of 2020.
I think on this, you know, I've been doing some research in this area. Actually, I haven't talked to you about this, Andy, with Warwick Business School around use of social media. And I think what we've actually seen as, you know, March happened was that people felt a bit icky talking overtly about their products and the features and benefits of their products. It didn't feel quite right. And I think everything that's happened this year has kind of almost pushed us into, in a positive, very good way, of having our content being more empathetic and understanding what's going on in the world. And that when we're creating content or planning or posting on a daily basis, that we should all have in the back of our minds, how are people feeling this week? What's going on in the world? What context am I posting this in? And whether you overtly refer to it or you don't is fine. You know, we started off all using the words unprecedented 6 months ago. That word is, you know, we don't want to use it anymore. But I still think it's okay to say kind of, you know, in these challenging times, or, you know, as we've all experienced, and just give a nod to it to show empathy and understanding. And that's going to, you know, help brands over time in terms of loyalty and support for them. How far you go, I think we have seen that it's dangerous to piggyback and get involved in topics for the sake of getting involved in these topics. It's got to be true and at the ethos of your organization if you are going to talk about the big stuff like mental health and Black Lives Matters. But agility and being empathetic, I think, is a great trend, and I really hope it stays.
Yeah, love that. Absolutely love that. So they're the kind of trends we've noticed over the last month. As you can see, there's a lot happening just in a month, which is crazy. So loads of great data to go through. Now, the evolution of consumption. Now, this is just madness. I love these kind of stats. So digital around the world in 2020, so 7.81 billion is the total population. 5.2 billion of the population have mobile phones, which is 67%, as you can see here. Internet users, 4.66 billion, so 60% of humanity use the internet, which is incredible. And social media users, which is just super incredible, which is 4.14 billion active social media users. So 53% of humankind use social media. Just frankly staggering numbers. And it just goes to show that there's just never any better way to communicate with people. And I think the next slide is even, you know, adds even more value to that. So the overall population has grown by 1%. Mobile phone usage has grown by 2%. Internet users, this is really encouraging to see there's increasing prevalence of internet access throughout the world, which is a fantastic statistic. But look at the growth of social media. The fact that very soon social media will be the same as people will have a mobile phone and they will have social access to social media. So you'll see that being, internet usage and social media usage is just growing. So that will become one and the same, as will, if you're using a mobile phone, you're going to have access to the internet, you will be on social. So very soon, those numbers, as you can kind of chart the growth of that. So as mobile phone consumption grows, you're going to see all of the other associated social media growth along with that. It's just staggering numbers.
Yeah. And I'll just say, Andy, I know that you posted this as a LinkedIn post saying, the stats are in. This is absolutely, this Hootsuite We Are Social report is my go-to data set. They do a big global update in January every year, don't they? Country by country. And it's like, hundreds of slides. And then this quarterly update. So we've got some in this slide deck, but if anyone ever wants stats, this would always be my go-to number one source for internet and social media stats.
Yeah, it is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal report. So this is one that everyone will like. The world's most used social platforms. Facebook dominating, and this is all based on either monthly active users, active user accounts, or addressable advertising audiences, because not everyone gives access to this data. You're going to notice a lot of ones that you wouldn't be day-to-day familiar with, and just go show the power of some of the ones, the networks that are more based in China and Asia in general. Facebook's growth is just phenomenal, and that keeps on growing. YouTube is still a huge underutilized resource. I say the same thing every month, but YouTube, I think there's actually even more statistics this month which lean towards the importance of YouTube. And then as we say this every month, Twitter stays pretty consistent. Pinterest has been a really big grower over the course of the last year, so that's big numbers for Pinterest. And TikTok's growth has slowed. So they've been around the 600 million mark, so it's still massive, but the overall growth of the platform is slowing. So yeah, we'll talk more about TikTok later, but they were my kind of takeaways from analyzing this.
Yeah. This is, again, one that's interesting when you look back at previous reports. And I know, again, on your LinkedIn post, people went, where's LinkedIn? And LinkedIn isn't appearing on there because it is monthly active user accounts. But I did try and look up a stat for this. And I think LinkedIn should come on there around 300 million active users. I think they announced yesterday that they've hit 722 million users overall. So sometimes it's in there, sometimes it creeps back up. But it's because it's not, the monthly active users. And also there's been comments, and I would have said this in the past as well, is YouTube, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, is it social media? For me, I usually tend to highlight that and say, well, it just reinforces the importance of video as content and the increasing use of one-to-one messaging behind the scenes, that not everything on social media has to be, here's my post, read it. Having conversations is obviously really important.
Indeed, yeah, I'd agree with that. Yeah, and good points on LinkedIn. I think this is a really awesome slide, because this is something that I think us as marketers, I don't really think about too much, actually, and I've never seen data presented this way. And this is your user overlap between social media platforms. This is just such a brilliant statistic of helping you understand, if this is your user base, let's say you're focusing on Facebook, what else do people also use? What other networks would you find people on? So if you're targeting people on Facebook, 90% of them also use YouTube, 73% also use Instagram, for example.
Yeah.
So you can start to see some really interesting overlaps when you start to think about your channel strategy and where you're targeting people. Once again, I'll call out YouTube, because look at the percentage. It's the fact is, if you are marketing on any one of these platforms, people are on YouTube as well. And clearly Instagram is, if you're on one of these platforms, you're going to be on Instagram too as well. So I think that's particularly interesting, I think, where you start to see the cross-platform penetration. Yeah. Any thoughts on that one, Luann?
Again, I picked out YouTube as being the one that, most people use in conjunction with something else. I think also when I looked at the numbers, if you're looking at anything that's probably a social media platform that's used in isolation, is Twitter. It kind of feels that people either use a whole family of social media platforms, or they like Twitter. So I'd like to see this in graphical form rather than just a table of numbers as well. But I think it's something that's really important for for anyone working on social media or planning right now to actually have a look at this and consider how the different platforms work together and whether your audience are using different platforms or not, because it not only shapes what you're doing, but the content that you're posting as well.
Exactly. And the only final thing I'd say on this is, like, you know, look how small the percentages are of people who do not use other platforms. So your social strategy had better be a multi-channel strategy, ultimately.
Yeah.
Right, this is good. This is in your heartland, Luann. So do you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, I love that you put some B2B stats in, because you don't always see them very often. And it made me really think about how I was interpreting them, and whether it's sometimes you go looking for stats to support your argument, or sometimes you find stats and you go, oh, that doesn't fit with how I feel about things. B2B's most influential information sources. Social media is at the bottom, but my argument against it being at the bottom, I mean, it's still 30.7%, so it's still a huge information source for B2B. But as I would expect anyway, right at the top is recommendations from experts in my network. The third one down is recommendations from industry analysts. And I would expect those recommendations to be facilitated by social media conversations. We see it all the time. Can anyone recommend? Has anyone seen this? I'm for. So I don't think you can use the numbers in isolation if I wanted to be more positive about the use of social media for B2B. Interesting, halfway down, I'd love to look back at this stat about the importance of conferences, trade shows and events. Still there, even though we're not doing them live, for, you know, in the quarter these stats are from, so it is good to still see them there, but all hugely credible information sources. And the marketer, the geek in me, I'd like to see how this maps for the different stages of the buying process as well, because if you were talking awareness, I would expect it to be more recommendations and social media, and as we came down it would be more user reviews and video and things like that. But great slide.
Yeah, no, I love it. And just the only thing for me to say is, like, the amount of it there that you are not in control of is phenomenal, right? So, you know, you've got your supplier website, you've got your conferences, and you've got your supplier calls and demos. The rest of it is predominantly what's being said about you. So the power of word of mouth of this is just so incredible. And once again, you know, social media is like the key facilitator of all of that word of mouth positive sentiment. So just goes to show, like, yeah, it's so important for that, because, you know, it might say 30%, but really it's the kind of air cover that covers all of this ultimately. So yeah, love that slide.
And then it's broken down by channel, isn't it? Which, again, really interesting for B2B, that YouTube and video content is so high. And we might also expect LinkedIn to be higher in that. And I mean, it's kind of in the top 5, but Facebook for B2B, I think, you know, even me as a B2B marketer often overlooks the value of Facebook for business to business, but it's a research tool and it is where people are hanging out, and the intent is possibly different when you're on Facebook, whether you're having conversations on there or looking for things versus LinkedIn. But we're going to talk about groups in a minute, and I think that's why Facebook is appearing so high on this slide.
Indeedy. Yeah, I would echo the same. It just goes to show, when you're thinking B2B, don't just think LinkedIn and Twitter. You know, actually there's a lot more to consider when you're thinking about B2B. And the power of Facebook, and particularly Facebook groups, I would agree with you. That's where this is coming from. Yeah. Right. Well, here we are. We're on Facebook. As if we planned it.
I know. We don't rehearse, and it's amazing. So Facebook is the first platform that we're looking at. Just a couple more slides. I'm not going to talk through these as individual numbers, but I think this slide deck is so important. If you're doing your own planning or you're presenting plans to someone else, go in and show them how the audience is looking on the platforms in terms of gender split, in terms of age split as well, how it's doing. And, you know, again, I wouldn't have predicted this, that Facebook is slightly more male than female. So again, I'd like to go back and have a look at those stats, because the accounts that I work on are definitely more female than male, even in B2B. But, you know, useful stats, and it's about knowing your audience. All of this is about knowing your audience. The next slide is another interesting one, because, you know, as marketers and when you're presenting anything, it's always, you know, how does this do? How does this do compared to average? It's really hard to find those stats. And normally my argument would be your answers are in your own data, and just try and look at your own data and continually improve and use that as a benchmark. But really great that this, you know, this report shows post engagement benchmarks for total posts, average, pages versus fans, and time spent. So if you need these stats, again, this is why this slide deck from Hootsuite and We Are Social is such an important source of information.
Yeah, exactly. Those engagement benchmarks, you make a mental note of those, because we're going to look at those across different platforms in a second. So, but note that they're fairly consistent, whether this is a photo post or video post. So, yeah, videos marginally outperform photos, as you might expect, but not by a massive margin, to be honest. But yeah, don't post links. It's probably the guidance on this. You know, if you look at how poor the engagement rates are on this. So, and just for reference, I'm sure most of us know, but engagement rate is basically the total post engagements divided by number of fans or followers. Cool.
Yes, it's just so interesting. We should have done a quiz at the end of this one with so many stats. Given a prize, but maybe next time. The big news in October came out of their Facebook's Community Summit, and they've announced this before. And, you know, I'm a strong believer, and it shows on these stats, that there is a massive power in using Facebook in groups. It's a good reason for people to go to Facebook regularly to see what's in their groups. Whether you're choosing groups that contain your peers so that you can ask questions and get support, whether it's a community of people like you where you're asking questions and it's a kind of a more of a learning group, or I'm also in a Facebook group where my target audience hang out, and I probably lurk a little bit more to kind of see what questions they're asking, get ideas, step in and be helpful. So I love the use of groups, particularly for business, but personal as well. Your community, you know what's going on if you're in a local Facebook group. And the big shift, again, we talk about is that groups are what has helped us stay connected. I think that is the value of being in these communities, seeing what's going on, being able to have conversations. And not only the 1.8 billion people in Facebook groups, the stat I looked at from the research as well, and the launch slides, was that there's 70 million group admins across the world. So there's a lot of people running groups right now, which brings us on to the other updates, which is additional features for group admins and how they can work, how you can now monetize your groups. They've launched a brand collaboration manager for groups that you can start to generate some revenue. Have you used this at all yet, Andy?
I've not. I've been spending some time looking at it though, because I love the fact of, like, you know, we do a lot of work with other groups, and we sponsor some, we advertise in some, etc. But now this really makes it a lot more formal, because historically you would have to like research all of these groups, make a little spreadsheet, reach out to the group admin, see if there's a way of working together. So now this puts it in a really nice, simple dashboard where you can look at those groups that are relevant to your niche, and then start building relationships with people, and basically using groups like you would like an influencer platform.
Really. So I think it's, dare we say, it's something to put into your marketing plans going forward, is how you can make the use of groups, and all the stats that we've shown help that stack up as well. On the next slide is, again, you know, there is more group features being added all the time, but I love this one about having topic hashtags. I like things to be organized. I like lists. I like being able to find things easily. And I think as groups are growing, it's important for group owners and people within the group to understand that you can search for topics and see what people are already saying on it, or to make sure that if you are participating, you highlight and use the hashtag on your post so that other people can find it. And it keeps things nice and neat and tidy as well, because I think you find in groups that the same topic comes up again and again, and you know, sometimes you could be in a group and go, well, someone asked this before, why didn't they search the group? And just the increasing use of hashtags on Facebook, I think, is going to be really helpful.
Agreed.
And then, we've got a couple more. Again, on groups, improved chat functionality. I haven't used this yet, but I love the fact that it goes back to the increased stats on using WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger, that we can be more interactive in real time with some chat functionality for groups. The next one is more engagement prompts within groups. So great for group admins to kind of get people involved and keep the group active, which is why people will keep going back if there is regularly updated content. It's that stickiness of the group and social media as a whole. And then on the next slide, Andy, we'll wrap up, is about group content being more discoverable as well through related discussions. So it does depend on the group settings, I think, and how you set it up. If it's a private group, don't worry about it. But if it's a public group, you might expect to be seeing more of that content going out into your main news feed, so that you can find things and, you know, dive into the groups as well. So I think more visibility and more use of groups overall is going to be great.
Yeah, and just to add to this as well, because what's going to be happening as part of this is that these, for the first time, group conversations based on your settings that Luann just said, is they'll now be discoverable through a Google search. So if someone is searching like best ways to, I don't know, make bread, it will then surface content within a Facebook group, which now means that the groups have an extra level of significance outside of the community that you built on your group. It now is discoverable when people are asking and searching questions as well on Google. So that hasn't launched yet, but it's about to, and I think that's going to be fascinating for increasing group content consumption.
Yeah.
Oh, last one on Facebook.
Last one. Well, it leads into Instagram because it covers both, doesn't it? About going back to that slide on cross-app compatibility, how many people are using more than one platform. I don't know whether this is a good thing or not. I think it is making life easier that all your messages from Facebook and Instagram are coming into one place, and that you can message across the two. I don't know how many different notifications I'm getting from different places altogether. So the more that can come into one place is probably a good thing. It's just then remembering which platform it came from to engage with it.
Indeedy. So on to Insta. So yeah, Insta's been a big grower this quarter, 7% growth. And interestingly, looking at the statistics, yeah, it skews female, but not as heavily female as I always thought Insta was. So I think that's quite curious. But yeah, Instagram still maintains its really incredible growth. You know, it's well over 1 billion users now. So it's huge. Engagement benchmarks. So I've seen lots of chatter about reducing Instagram engagement reducing and reach reducing as a result. So you can see that the engagement benchmarks are definitely above Facebook. Very interesting that single photo posts are coming out more engaging than video or carousel posts, which I find that fascinating. So when I say engagement is basically just on the basis of likes and comments here. But ultimately, I would have thought carousels would have won that one. I can understand video not potentially on Insta, but benchmarks are still higher. But interestingly, they're definitely down than what you used to get on Instagram, and that will be as a result of them bringing in Reels, to be honest. So there's less space in the feed, so naturally, typical feed posts don't get as much reach, which means they don't get as much engagement as a result.
Yeah.
What do you reckon, Luann? Any comment on that? Or
I think it's just, the challenge with social media is that things change all the time, don't they? So you've never actually kind of found your golden spot of, this is what works for me, I'll keep doing it. You've got to keep reviewing and looking at your data and changing things all the time, which is why presentations like this exist, isn't it?
Indeed. So yeah, onto Reels. Every month I'm talking about new updates to Reels because it's growing very quickly. It's garnering more interest in the feed. The initial moaning of like how it's just a poor TikTok clone starts to diminish as the feature gathers more and more pace. You'll see a similar thread of conversation when Luann starts talking about LinkedIn stories later on, actually. So. And basically, new audio features means that you can take the audio files from other Reels that you see to use on your own Reels. And now there's an audio library, so you can go ahead and look up certain like tracks that you want to go alongside your reels as well. So just making the whole creation process much quicker and much easier, much simpler, I think is the key word for those that are not kind of seasoned TikTokers. So yeah, they're kind of lowering the barriers to entry. And then e-commerce is already being scoped out in test, but I thought I'd mention this already, just goes to show like that they're building this feature with the feature being reels, with the view of trying to help people monetize their content immediately.
Yeah.
Tougher regulation for influencers that failed to declare sponsorship. So the Competition and Markets Authority in the UK and the Advertising Standards Authority clamping down on this. They're finding lots of influencers hiding like hashtag ad in a whole group of hashtags. So the encouragement is that there's going to be big fines now for influencers that fail to declare this properly, because now influencers are properly recognized as an advertising channel. So complete like clarity in the fact that this is paid sponsors, a paid partnership with. As you can see at the top of these posts, you can declare them at the top that they are paid partnerships with. But what lots of people do is like they'll take their own pictures, post it on their own feed and hide hashtag ad. It needs to really run as like a paid sponsorship, paid sponsored post, so that everyone who's consuming it knows that that person who's posting it has been paid to do so. So lots of regulation, but I mean it's a good thing because it helps people take this as a influencers as a marketing channel ever more seriously. So yeah, I'm all for that. So Luann made a great point about this earlier, which is about the holiday season, the fact that this is going to start earlier. And just in time, who to thank it, Instagram and Facebook have launched some new features to help people spend their money on their platform. And what they've launched here is two things. So one, for the first time, you always used to have the ability to tag products within your organic posts. Now this is possible within paid. So, like this picture of this woman wearing this jacket, you can tag that and people can purchase those products directly through Insta. And now there's shopping engagement custom audiences on Facebook Business Manager. So when you're running ads that are based on these kind of like product tags, you can start to run bespoke ads for people that maybe have viewed a certain product, maybe gone to cart but not purchased, and be able to like retarget those individuals, because that's going to be a very common thing that happens in the holiday season. Lots of people shopping, discovering things, adding things to carts, forgetting about it. So those custom audiences are going to be really important for anyone that's running e-commerce, being able to retarget and get those conversions.
And it's really dangerous as a consumer, isn't it, that it's so easy to buy, particularly, the stats I see on accounts and my own usage is that it's something that I scroll through in the evening when I'm, dual screening and things like that. And, the easier they make it to buy things is great on one hand, but as a consumer, it's, there's another challenge.
It is dangerous, definitely. But, going back to that stat we said right at the start, 1 in 4 people's purchasing behavior is influenced by what they see on social. So this is really where Instagram are going to win big, especially as Instagram shop evolves as well, allowing people to make purchases directly on Instagram. This social commerce thing is really going to take over, and it's for once, and whilst it won't happen completely this year, over the next year, we're going to see these platforms really take the fight to Amazon. That's for sure.
It's a bit like the whole world of social media. It's a bit of a leveler, isn't it? It's accessible to everyone. You don't need the prime spots in shopping centres to have a presence on Instagram. You need different levels of ad budget, but at the same time, an independent shop could be appearing alongside a high street retailer. So I think that's going to be great.
Yeah, I absolutely adore that. Yeah, really good point. Right, back over to
when Andy and I talked about this session, planning it a couple of weeks ago, our message was, there's not really very much been happening the past couple of weeks. And then literally 10 minutes later, it's like, LinkedIn have done something. We've got some new features. Back to the slide deck of stats. Again, worth looking at. LinkedIn is growing. People are joining, perhaps because it's seen primarily and has a history in a jobs platform. And we know that marketplace is busy right now with people looking for new roles, and LinkedIn is a great place to do that. Their advertising reach is going up. I think they're adding new targeting all the time. There is a great way for reaching B2B niche audiences with sponsored content and ads in the feed as well. And probably just in terms of split, probably would expect this one to be slightly more male, and it is. LinkedIn, again, like all the other platforms and the changes in the world, but this is in progress already, launched events earlier this year. If you are running events, I would highly recommend you set it up on LinkedIn as an event, because then you can invite your network to it. You can start discussions before an event, have it going on in there. But they've added more features this time, which is now you can search for events, which I think is brilliant, because before you had to wait for someone in your network to invite you to it. Now you can be searching for them, which is obviously going to increase registrations. And I was actually really surprised by this next bit, and I had to double check it a couple of times, is that you can export the data from LinkedIn, which, you know, it's very hard to export data from LinkedIn since the whole world of GDPR permissions. But if people are signing up to events, you are able to export that data. Do check your GDPR rules and guidelines. I'm just going to say that, not being a legal expert, but the fact that you can do that, I think, just gives even more value to LinkedIn as an event promotions tool. And then the big change that happened 10 minutes after our exchange of, what we're going to talk about, was stories. They've talked about it for a long time. The thing about LinkedIn is you don't actually know the day that it's coming, and then suddenly you switch on and, you know, and it's there. Stories are there. I know you've been using them, Andy. I've tried out a couple of them. For me, I think they're great. You know, I love stories, the fact that they're raw, they're in the moment, they're behind the scenes. You can just post them really easily. What I'm seeing on LinkedIn, I think it's only just been a week or so, hasn't it, is there's people like us that are testing it out right now to see what happens and to see how the stats are going. I'm not seeing huge amounts of stories, and I'll share my, but I think they'll grow as people know that they're there and use them. The downside for me is that they're only on the mobile app. And I tend to be very much a LinkedIn user on the desktop, and now I kind of have to go, let me go and have a look at stories. Which I'm doing less and less because of working from home all the time and not traveling. Instagram for me was pick up my phone in some downtime to scroll, but LinkedIn as a business tool to see stories there is a bit, you know, another thing to think about, and that might be why they're not becoming part of the habit yet. I'm also struggling, maybe it's because I've got access to so many pages, that for me, all the company pages I'm admin of and my own, I've got quite a few that I have to scroll through before I get to see what other people in my network are posting. And for me, that's, you know, it's not a big thing, but it's a bit of an annoyance that I've got to kind of scroll past things as well before I can get to see the stories. I'm not, you know, if you did a story now, Andy, it's not immediately visible. I've got to do a little bit of fiddling.
Yeah, indeed. So yeah, I would share the same views. The view counts are pretty high. The user interface is pretty poor at the moment, being that the majority of LinkedIn views are on a desktop, and will increasingly be so, or they'll at least stay there because we're not traveling. But is it just a great time to test it out? I mean, currently it is just really marketers like us testing it out, rather than, you know, anyone using it for anything outside of that. But I mean, we got to start somewhere, and it's a good chance at this moment in time to have a bit of a play around with it, because it's like, you know, like we were talking about with Instagram Reels, it's gonna evolve very rapidly. And I for one, I'm pleased to see it arrive, and pleased to see, or excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, and, you know, absolutely, you know, if we were, you know, when we go back to having business events and conferences, we will be on it all day. You know, we'll be broadcasting from the events and before we get up and speak, and what other speakers are doing. So I think now is just a good time to test it while we're in the world we're in. No updates to share from Twitter. Really, you know, they keep testing, they keep trying things, but, you know, they're not a huge adder of new features to things. So really for Twitter, we've just got this slide to show you in terms of the stats, what people are doing. Much more male orientated again, which surprises me, but this is global, so perhaps we need to look at a UK breakdown of that one. But it's a great platform for news and events. I love it.
So onto Google. Whilst this kind of brings it more into the broader content marketing world rather than just social. So I've got a few bits to talk about here. So updates to Podcast Manager. So if you have a podcast right now, or you don't, or you're thinking about one, now's the good time to do it. And ignore the fact that I just realized I spelt manager wrong and put podcast major. Ignore that. But yeah, this is where it's incredibly powerful. Like podcasting right now is still growing. So if you've got one, definitely start to use Google Podcast Manager. It's like any other platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And you can use like platforms like Captivate to take your one podcast and push it to multiple platforms. So you don't need, the good thing is you don't need to worry about, having to learn the ins and outs of Podcast Manager on Facebook, on Google rather. But where Google Podcast Manager is really powerful, the analytics are really good, and it'll also tell you where people stumbled across your podcast from. So this is fantastic for you trying to interpret where your podcast is getting traction and what channels you need to be working on more from that perspective. They also made some significant updates to search. Now, I'm not going to talk through all of them because they're not actionable. We can't really do anything with them. Google are always improving search, and they're constantly testing. But one thing that I do want to call out is this AI-driven video search. So one of the things that they're starting to work on is being able to pull out the specific section of a video that you need to watch based on your query. And that's super powerful because already Google will show you results from YouTube on the basis of your search query. If you're searching what's the best time to post on Instagram, it will throw you back some videos already. But what it's doing now is being able to throw you back the specific segment of that video that relates to your precise query using their AI-driven video search. Super powerful, incredible stuff. But it actually just once again reinforces the importance of YouTube. Once again, sound like a broken record, but so powerful in search. But also the ability for you to kind of chapterize these YouTube videos, which you can do already. So putting chapters in your YouTube video, if you've got a long video that describes lots of different things, giving those a clear chapter name will really help the search algorithm make sure that it's pulling the right part of that video to mean that more people are going to view your specific content on the basis of a query. So that's really powerful. Google Analytics, new version of Google Analytics come in. It's actually live now, so feel free to go test it out. So with Google Analytics, there's better tracking that's coming through this, so you can see some better insights as to where people have found your sites from, how long people are spending on it. So just basically more data. But interestingly, they're being able to pull this data irrespective of whether people have opted into cookies. Don't ask me about the GDPR implications of that, but Google are very, very clever at thinking about how people, if they have opted out of cookies, how Google can still track that. So that is a new version of analytics. Have a read up on that if it sounds interesting to you, because the cookie bit is potentially a legal minefield, so I don't want to comment on that bit. No. Which leads us onto YouTube. So I'm just going a little bit quicker just on the basis of being able to answer some questions. So shopping tags, once again, the e-commerce piece. So like on this video, so people can buy merchandise directly off the back of watching this video. Have no idea what Lucas the Spider is, but it seems that he's very popular. And so allowing people to buy branded merchandise directly and convert directly on YouTube off the back of that. So similar to what we saw with Instagram with product tags, once again, making that whole kind of content and commerce become the same thing. So the whole process of us always thinking as marketers to drag people off social to go to a different website to do a conversion, that's actually, the future of this is going to be becoming in content conversion. So having people be able to purchase these products whilst they're still consuming that content. And that is where the power and future of commerce will be, along with social. YouTube are also bringing out this thing called Shorts, which is like Instagram Reels, is like TikTok. So this is currently in India, but it's rolling out to everyone. I don't know whether people are going to start consuming content on YouTube and making YouTube much more of a kind of interactive social platform. That's going to be interesting, but don't forget there's 2 billion monthly active users. So there's a huge amount of opportunity and a fantastic foundation for YouTube to build off. So I'm going to be watching that one really carefully. No updates from Pinterest. Pinterest had some significant updates to all of the parts of the platform last month that we covered, but ultimately still growing significantly. And this is the only one that still skews massively female. The male audience has been growing over the course of lockdown, but it's still not a patch on the female orientation of Pinterest. Final kind of quick network snapshot. TikTok's now been banned in another country, in Pakistan. Doesn't really impact us, but it just does helps us understand why TikTok's growth is starting to slow. Their deadline for the sale of TikTok's US business is, I think it's the 14th of November. It's in November anyway. So it's still on some very dodgy foundations at the moment, but no real significant updates you need to know product-wise. But let's just kind of summarize where we're at over the course of the last kind of 45 minutes or so. Facebook putting significant emphasis into groups, as Luann was talking about, loads of great updates to drive better engagement. Facebook is still about increasing engagement above all else, so groups still significant. Instagram, e-commerce, I won't talk more about that because I've been speaking about it. Hopefully it's kind of clear. That's clearly where they're headed. Watch out for LinkedIn stories. It's going to evolve every single week. There'll be new things added. So even if it doesn't look quite right now, keep an eye because it will change very rapidly. Twitter, they're just all about increasing engagement at the moment and trying not to cause another political storm, basically, because obviously with the election in the US, so there really is no new features happening at the moment. And if you're not on Twitter right now, now's not the time to get on it. Steer clear.
A week.
Google and YouTube are all about conversion, so helping people drive conversions, whether it's a search query or whether it's watching a YouTube video, really helping your content drive that result that you're looking for. And Snapchat and TikTok, I say the same thing every month. It's like growth has slowed, it's still maturing, they're still on a bit dodgy ground, so unless you've got an audience, I wouldn't worry too much. So we're gonna do questions. So I'm conscious that I've got to be off the call in 5 minutes or so, but you can always stay on, Luann. So you can connect with us on LinkedIn. So just search us. Just make sure you spell Luann's name correctly. Feel free to mention us on Twitter. If you do want to buy Content Cal, and you get 20% off. Just email me at andy@contentcal.co if you do want to, if now's the right time to buy Content Cal, or if you have any specific questions, you're always welcome to email me. And what else? The final thing I'm going to do is just send this kind of strategy session that we're running. So I'm running drop-in sessions on social media strategy, which is just free to attend. These are group sessions, and if you want to join, I run them 3 times a week. So I'm going to pop that in the chat. Great.
It's that time of year, isn't it? I was talking to someone this week that normally we would be having, real focus on 2021 planning, yet we might still feel that we're in firefighting mode. And I think, it is really important that we, while we're staying agile on a day-to-day and taking into account everything that's happening around us, as I said, in terms of the content, having a plan couldn't be more important anyway. And particularly when we've got such access to all the amazing stats that were in that slide deck, to make a really robust plan and to communicate your plan to other people as well. So don't miss out on those sessions.
Love it. I'm going to pick up on a question from Ray, actually, saying the big problem I'm having with commerce and social media is digital products can't be sold, I guess, for products that can't be directly transacted, right? So maybe it's like merchandise or whatever. But I mean, it's kind of encouraged us to be a bit more creative with what we can monetize. Let's say if we were a bakery, we could sell baking masterclasses, for example, right? We can monetize our content through, if there's any kind of proprietary knowledge that we have, that gives us an opportunity to monetize that. So whether it's a course, whether it's a masterclass, that would be my additional thoughts on that. But what do you reckon, Luann? It's a good question.
It's a brilliant question, and it applies to so many people and what we're doing. And I think, of course, it's a challenge, but, there is restrictions on everything. I think this is when you really need to focus on your organic content as well, and just keep storytelling about what you're doing, what you're working on, the behind the scenes, which is why stories is so great as well. it shouldn't stop you doing anything. Yeah, it's frustrating that there's a feature that's not available to you, but just keep talking about it. Share testimonials, share case studies, who you're working with, and hopefully they will add it at some point when there's demand, but maybe they just have to test it on physical stuff, the easy stuff first, and so we'll be set up for it. But test your organic stuff, because as soon as, I don't know if it's going to become available, but when a workaround, perhaps you will know what has worked well for you organically and can move that into your paid stuff.
Yeah, great point. Sarah's asked a question. So Facebook group content will be discoverable only if the group is public. Yeah, so that's that's very much a group setting. So it won't, if it's a private group, it remains as such. Yeah. Great question. Just saw that Pamela said good morning from Fort Worth in Texas. So that is very early morning. So yes, good morning. Thank you for joining. Brilliant.
We've got a global audience, but I think we've got on questions.
Love that. So amazing. Well, anyone is always welcome to get in touch with us. Any other questions that you might want to ask in private, absolutely fine. If you ever want to talk with me about social media strategy, you've got that little link there, so feel free to book in. And Luann is always super helpful as well. I'm speaking for you, Luann, but
thank you. Yeah, love the questions, because we're all at different stages of doing this and don't always remember what the questions were, or are working in different sectors on different products. So questions are always never a daft thing. They're always a good thing. Exactly. So with that, let's close the sessions. We're before the hour, so we won't overrun. Thank you, Luann. Thank you for joining. So yeah, lots of people on today. So thank you. And if you need anything else, you know where we are. Thank you. Bye. Bye.